Hello everybody, and welcome! This is Eve. It is purple. It is also the second planet from the Sun in Kerbal Space Program and its sequel Kerbal Space Program 2, which is the focus of this video. And it is one of the toughest nuts to crack if you want to perform a mission where you land on it and want to bring back the crew somehow. Especially when you have to deal with an early access game, which KSP2 very much still is at time of recording. As a veteran of the original KSP, here's how I usually design landers for EVE return missions. I go into the vehicle assembly building and try to find the lightest aerodynamic crew capsule and use the delta-V indicators and thrust-to-weight readouts to build a multi-stage vehicle that comes to roughly 8,000 meters per second of delta-V and has a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1 in atmosphere on EVE. What you can see here is me using the mod Kerbal Engineer Redux to display those parameters, but they are there in the stock game. It's just a little more cumbersome to extract all that information than having it on display in a neat little window like this. After I have that vehicle, I usually drain all fuel from it. That's important for reducing the mass you need to throw into orbit and transfer to EVE. To regain the fuel, I include a drill and refinery to extract resources from EVE's soil. The added components are not as heavy as full tanks, so this is a benefit for getting everything there. It also makes entry into the purple planet's dense atmosphere a lot easier, and you only need a fraction of the parachutes to safely land this compared to when you send it with full fuel tanks. Since the inclusion of robotic parts, which are part of the Breaking Ground DLC, I have refined this lander design by adding quad rotors to it. This has a couple of desirable effects. First, the rotors can be used to slow down the descent, so you can further reduce the amount of parachutes. It also enables the lander to rise up to roughly 18 kilometers above sea level without having to use any fuel, so it further reduces the mass needed to build an EVE return vehicle. The example you see here is taken from my Invictus 2-part movie where I visited all planets and moons in stock KSP, and on top of that, all planets and moons from the Outer Planets mod. It was a long and exciting mission, and I highly encourage you to watch that if you have the time. Also, if you enjoy Kerbal content and aren't subscribed yet, come and join this wonderful community we have here. You will see that the comment section is much more friendly than with other videos on YouTube. Coming back to KSP2, how can we do an EVE return mission here? In short, badly. And the current early access state of the game is to blame for that. You'll see what I mean over the course of the next couple of minutes. First off, I cannot build a vehicle with in-situ resource utilization, or ISRU for short, where I drill for resources and refine them to propellant, since this feature is not yet present in Kerbal Space Program 2. Also, there are no robotic parts, and not even a plan to include them in the full version of the game as of now, so I cannot go the route of doing the quadcopter thing. Old school, fully fueled heavy lander it is then. And here we bump into the next problem. Or actually, it is two problems. The first is that we do have a thrust-to-weight ratio indicator, but it only shows it for Kerbin. You cannot switch to a different planet or moon, which makes building landers for other bodies very much guesswork right now. Usually, for most of them, it is sufficient to have this number above 1, since there's only one planet that has a higher surface gravity than Kerbin, and that is, unfortunately, EVE with 1.7 G, according to the KSP wiki. Yes, I know there's also Joule, but it is a gas giant, and you're not supposed to be able to land on it. Although you currently can in KSP2, which is going to be fixed with a future update, probably. So, taking into account EVE's higher gravity and denser atmosphere, I eyeballed a thrust-to-weight ratio of more than 2 and hoped for the best. Aside from the thrust-to-weight issue, we also have a delta-V issue, delta-V being the number telling us how much change in velocity we will be able to manage, meaning our fuel reserves basically. And predicting this does not work well in KSP2 at all, unfortunately. especially when you go for asparagus staging, which is something I like to do for EVE landers because it further increases the efficiency of your vehicle. You need round about 8,000 meters per second of delta V to get into EVE orbit when starting from roughly sea level. So that's what I always aim for, or at least try to, because KSP2 makes me guess a lot of times with the DV numbers, and yes, I have reported this as a bug already. Let's see when they will be able to fix that. Anyways, here's my attempt for an EVE lander and return vehicle. The goal is to land it safely without having to rely on the engine, so we can save every little drop of fuel. We're going to need it. And one thing KSP2 does better than the original is the inclusion of these huge new landing gear parts. They are well suited for heavy-duty applications like this vehicle, although I did have a few problems with them in the past. Since KSP2 still suffers from extreme wobbly rocket syndrome, I decided to do 2 launches, one for the lander and one for a transfer stage that would take the lander to EVE and the crew back to Kerbin. I docked both of them in orbit and then sent them to EVE, and yeah, I forgot some struts on that transfer stage, so it was still a lot more wobbly than I would have liked. But even with all that wobbliness, we managed to get to EVE and undock our lander to get down to the surface. Alright, so we finally ended up at EVE, but not on land. Instead we landed, well, splashed down rather, in the Explodium Sea. But I thought this would be a good opportunity to check if my lander is capable of returning from sea level, since I am at sea level. And as you can see, it isn't, because the thrust is not sufficient, so this comes back to the problem I mentioned earlier.
One eternity later.
Well, I already burnt away most of my first stage propellant for basically nothing, so this thing is never going to reach EVE orbit. But let's see how it will perform further on. I mean, this is a test after all. But the problems just piled on. Trying to stage resulted in the engines turning off and the decouplers not staging. When they finally did stage, they had a water splash effect. Weird. I then had to open Parts Manager, which still takes way too long to open, and reactivate every single engine before being able to continue my flight because all engines were off. But the text in Parts Manager says deactivate, by the way, and yeah, that's a blatant lie right there. Okay, next stage. And throttle and SAS were off. Why? Who knows? I hope the developers will, because I have sent them my log files from this event with one of the multiple bug reports. A bit higher up, we have the same problem as before with the first side booster stage. Staging results in center engine deactivation. At least it's easier to reactivate a single engine rather than 7. Should put those on action groups next time. And when we reach the final stage of this vehicle, the game completely destroys any hope for success by locking the nav ball, glitching out like crazy and not accepting any trajectory inputs. KSP2 says, "You are not going to space today." Yeah, and honestly, this is where things stand right now, because I was too frustrated to continue at this point. I wish I could have ended this video with more of a success, but honestly, these constant setbacks have turned me away from KSP2 for a couple of weeks. In the meantime, I played Outer Wilds, which is fantastic, and I won't say anything more about it because you should experience it for yourself. I went into that game without knowing anything. I just heard it's great and it's something with space, so I took a gamble and I don't regret anything. It's really an excellent game. And yeah, I also played Jedi Survivor, which was okay, great game, good sequel to the first one. And I have done the Starship and Blue Moon video, which cost me a few subscribers apparently. Good times. Alright, that was my first attempt at an EVE return mission in KSP2. As you can see, there are still many roadblocks in the way before I can fly this mission like I would prefer doing it. Maybe there's a different way, a KSP2 bug preventing way, but I'm not sure I have the patience to find out. If you have watched patiently until now, thank you! And if you like what I'm doing, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. You can also hop over on my Discord channel and discuss all things space and KSP with a group of like-minded people. Hopefully, we can celebrate a future KSP2 update that fixes the issues I experienced during this mission rather sooner than later. Alright, they announced in the meantime they will go to a longer update schedule than before with patch 1 and 2. Well, as long as it comes someday. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.